It's 1972 in Hwange National Park in Rhodesia. Newlyweds Len Harvey, a veteran Rhodesian game warden, and his wife Jean are honeymooning at an old elephant control camp at Shapi Pan. Also vacationing at the camp are fellow senior ranger Willy De Beer, his wife, daughter, and stepson Colin Matthews. The surrounding area is beautiful, the perfect place to relax and enjoy the peace and tranquility of the African bush. Each couple stays in their own pole-and-dagga hut, rustic mud structures constructed with burnt mopane poles for walls and thatched grass roofs. Openings left in the side of the structures serve as windows, keeping the buildings cool during the warmer months. On their first day in camp, the rangers noticed 3 lions exhibiting strange behavior. The cats seemed to pay little attention to the presence of the couples in the camp, showing no fear. They're so bold as to actually enter the camp in broad daylight, picking off chickens kept by the staff, and right in plain view of the guests. To the experienced rangers, this is a red flag. It isn't typical of lions to be so brazen. But despite their threatening behavior, there's nothing to be done. The lions haven't shown any outward aggression towards the campers, and even if they had, the men are unarmed. At the time of their stay, a bush war is taking place in Rhodesia, and so firearms not being actively used are ordered to be kept under lock and key within the national park system, stored at the camp's armory to prevent theft for guerrilla purposes. The next day, the lions return, patrolling the perimeter of the camp. Their posture sparks unease among the visitors, the behavior becoming increasingly fearless. The rangers know this situation has become potentially dangerous. However, the lions eventually disappear, and after an uneventful but nonetheless stressful day, the couples retire to their quarters early for bed after turning off the camp's generator. It's now just after 11 p.m. Aside from the constant nighttime drone of insects, the old elephant station is still and silent. As everyone is sound asleep, one of the lions, a 260-pound lioness, has returned to the camp. Now alone, she stalks the perimeter under the cover of darkness. Stealthily, the cat makes its way to the mud hut, where Len and Jean lie sleeping inside. It hears the soft breath of its unsuspecting prey behind the earthen walls. Seeing the open window, the lion leaps through, landing on top of Jean. The woman screams, breaking the night silence as the predator immediately bites her in the small of the back. Her cry startles Len awake, who without hesitation jumps on the back of the lion and begins to fight the brute barehanded, punching at the big cat's head until it releases its grip on his wife and turns its attention to him. The lion suddenly rears back, hurling Len to the ground, quickly turning to grip his shoulder in its powerful jaws. He pleads for Jean to leave the hut and find safety. Badly injured and bleeding, she makes her way to the door and begins to run across the camp towards the De Beer's shelter, but stops several paces in. Instinctively, she wants to help her husband, who had thrust himself into the fray to save her life. But as she stands staring at the hut she's just escaped, she hears the struggle taking place between her husband and the lion inside, and knows that Len is beyond saving. Indeed, the lion has shifted its grip to around Len's throat, quickly ending the altercation. It now begins to feed. Jean is now standing at the entrance to the De Beer's hut and frantically bangs at the door. Willie answers to find the terrified, bloodied woman. He brings her inside, where she alerts him to what's just happened before passing out from exhaustion and blood loss. De Beer quickly wakes up Colin Matthews and instructs him to start the camp's generator while he runs to the station's main office to retrieve their weapons. De Beer grabs 2 rifles from the armory, one for Colin and one for himself, loads them, and runs back towards the scene. He links back up with Matthews en route and hands him a bolt-action .243. The 2 men then make their way through the darkness to the Harveys' quarters. When they arrive outside the tiny hut, they're met with stillness, dead silence. It's so quiet they're not sure the lion is still inside. De Beer softly calls out to Harvey and hopes that perhaps the lion has fled and he somehow survived the ordeal. His heart sinks when, instead of Harvey's voice, he hears the low, guttural growl of a lioness guarding over her prey. He very slowly advances towards the window, rifle at the ready. He can now hear the wet sounds of the lion feeding on the other side of the mud wall. It would be easy to take a blind shot right through the structure and hit the lion at near point-blank range. But De Beer isn't sure if Harvey is dead or simply unconscious, and a misplaced bullet could kill him. He needs a visual of the lion to ensure a safe shot. De Beer slowly eases his head through the dark opening of the window and looks inside. In a thin ray of light cast by the soft glow of the moon through the partially open front door, he can see the bottom half of Harvey lying on the floor, his legs lifeless and bloodied. But he doesn't see the lion. And then, suddenly, De Beer experiences a deafening thud, followed by a sharp, stinging pain across his head. The lioness, with one paw, swats at De Beer through the porthole, driving her sharp claws into his skull and tearing the flesh from his forehead. Blood streams down his face from the open wounds and into his eyes, blinding him temporarily. He screams and falls backwards in immense pain, but in an instant the ranger climbs to his feet, wiping the blood from his eyes. He instructs Matthews to tear an improvised bandage from his t-shirt to dress the wound to stem the bleeding. He then reshoulders his weapon and edges towards the window once more. De Beer now leads with his rifle, sticking it barrel first through the opening. This time, however, the lion is prepared to pounce, and as his head crests the window ledge, she jumps up, wrapping both front legs around him in a bear hug. She then, with both paws, embeds her claws in the back of De Beer's head at the base of his skull. The cat pulls with all of its strength, trying to drag the man through the window and into the hut, where she can continue her attack in earnest. In his struggle to escape, De Beer releases his grip on the rifle, dropping it into the cabin. Now, with both hands, he clutches the edge of the window and pushes back as hard as he can. With her claws firmly embedded in his head, the cat now attempts to wrap her powerful jaws around the man's face, but she can't quite manage it. Then, with one final burst of energy, De Beer pushes off the wall with everything he has. The cat's claws lose their grip and grate forward over the back of the ranger's skull, tearing his scalp upwards and pulling it over his face. He falls backwards, barely conscious, as the lion leaps through the window and on top of his depleted body. Blinded by the skin flap hanging before his eyes, De Beer instinctively covers the top of his head with his hands. The lioness almost immediately goes for the head to bite through the skull. As she endeavors to drag him away, she can't get a good purchase around his head. With every bite to readjust and gain a sufficient grip, the lion crushes the bones in De Beer's hands and fingers. The man screams in agony, blind, helpless, and barely conscious. In the chaos, the lion doesn't notice the young man standing in the shadows just yards away. Matthews, frozen with fear, has witnessed the entire ordeal. .243 in hand, he could easily shoot the lion and end the attack at any moment, but he doesn't. Even though there's a round waiting in the chamber ready to go, the rifle's safety mechanism is engaged. Matthews has never handled a firearm before. He doesn't know the rifle even has a safety mechanism, much less how to disengage it. As he fumbles around with the rifle, desperately trying to pull the trigger, he stumbles backwards and into a metal bucket in the yard, making a loud clatter and alerting the marauding lion to his presence. Startled, the beast looks up from its victim, and with a fearsome roar it charges straight towards Matthews. The lion slams into him with the force of a small moving vehicle, causing the rifle to fly from his grip and fall to the ground. She then sets about her assault on the young man. In the initial struggle, he somehow manages to stick his arm in the cat's mouth. Grabbing her tongue, he proceeds to force his arm as far back into the lion's throat as he can. As he does, the predator's vice-like jaws slam shut around his arm like a steel trap, snapping the bones like matchsticks. With the big cat's attention now focused on Matthews, De Beer, blinded, broken, and barely conscious, feels around on the ground with his mangled hands in search of the .243. Miraculously, he finds the rifle and grips it as best he can despite his shattered fingers. He shoulders it, releases the safety, and unable to see his target, listens for his shot. He can hear the lion grunting and growling as it savages his son, and he aims the barrel for where he estimates the cat's head to be. He squeezes the trigger once, then as fast as he can with his crushed hands, slams 2 more rounds into the chamber and sends him down range. Silence falls over the camp once more. De Beer calls out to his stepson, hoping he's still alive. The man answers, but he's very badly injured, and one of the shots from the .243 has nearly removed his right hand. As the men begin to assess their wounds, Matthews screams once more. In her death throes, the lioness manages one final bite to the leg of the young man, removing his kneecap completely before she finally succumbs to her wounds. The fight is finally over, and the two men help each other back to their hut to await medical attention. The following morning, the ranger, his young stepson, and Mrs. Harvey are all evacuated to the nearest medical facility by helicopter. Both men are badly cut from head to toe and mauled severely. De Beer receives 222 stitches to his head alone, and will undergo months of skin and bone grafts to repair his pulverized hands. What's more, he's allergic to antibiotics and must rely solely on his body's natural defenses to fight the infection from the lion's bacteria-riddled bites. But despite the odds, and with ongoing bouts of dizziness and tinnitus, he miraculously survives. Colin Matthews also must endure extensive operations to save his hand and knee, but he too survives the attack. Jean Harvey makes a full recovery from her bites as well after a lengthy stay in the hospital. A post-mortem on the lion's remains finds nothing out of the ordinary that would explain her attack on the campers that night. She's found to be uninjured and in good health aside from the gunshot wound she sustains as part of the attack. De Beer's shots all found their mark that night despite his inability to see. One shot having passed through both lungs, one destroying the lion's shoulder, and finally one cutting through the cat's face, hitting Matthews just below the wrist that was lodged in the lion's mouth. The lion's two companions that she'd been seen with during the previous days are never seen again.